Hi, everybody, and welcome to the third of the debate sessions. Just a reminder before we start, the views being expressed by the presenters today do not necessarily represent their personal views. This is a class exercise, and so they've been given the position. This is not a position they chose themselves. Some of them will be arguing for things they don't necessarily believe in, so please don't hold them personally accountable for anything they say. We're going to start the first debate, which is Americans should go vegan to benefit the environment. In this debate, each team will be given 4 minutes to present their opening arguments, and then there'll be 3 minutes rebuttals and 1 minute for wrapping up. So we're going to start with the for team first, to say that Americans should go vegan to benefit the environment. For team, if you want to unmute yourselves, you have 4 minutes starting from now.
Okay, so we as Americans, we really like our independence and our ability to live our lives exactly as we want to, and we don't really like being told what to do, which is the reasoning behind a lot of pushback against veganism. Yet at the same time, we're always talking about how can we reduce our carbon footprint, our impact on the environment, and how are we going to battle climate change. And veganism is an option we overlook all the time. According to the University of Oxford, veganism is one of the best ways to reduce our effect on the environment. So the typical diet in the US heavily features meat, dairy, and other animal products, which makes it so that it'd be extremely difficult nationwide to switch to a plant-based diet. However, the US government is a major perpetrator of this obstacle for Americans. Every year, the US government spends about $38 billion to subsidize meat and dairy products, which offsets prices in supermarkets and makes it more available for Americans. But they only spend less than 1% of that $38 billion on subsidizing fruits and vegetables. And farmers that grow fruits, vegetables, and tree nuts don't even receive direct subsidies, with the exception of a few small programs for apples. So if we were to redirect subsidies, produce could become more accessible to Americans, and it would be more likely to be consumed at higher rates like animal products. And then prices would drop because of subsidies, availability would increase, and it would make it an easier option for Americans than it is now to consume produce. Also, our markets would then adapt to the change in preferences nationwide, as veganism would then become the norm. So beyond the fact that veganism is an overall better diet for our health, it's more resource effective and environmentally friendly than animal-based diets. If we were to completely replace all animal products with plant-based products, it would add enough food to feed 350 million additional people. And as we all know, food insecurity is a significantly increasing problem that we need to address along with other environmental issues. Furthermore, animal-based agriculture accounts for a large amount of our greenhouse gas emissions and has a significant impact on our environment. A vegan diet takes about 300 gallons of water a day, and an animal-based diet takes about 4,000 gallons of water a day to produce. You would save more water by not eating a pound of meat than you would by not showering for 6 months. In order to produce 1 calorie of meat, it takes 11 times as much fossil fuel energy as it takes to produce 1 calorie of plant protein. Meat, egg, and dairy products account for 65% of nitrous oxide emissions worldwide. And then chickens, cows, pigs, and turkeys are the largest producers of methane in the United States. And methane is 20 times more effective than carbon dioxide at trapping heat in the atmosphere. Additionally, raising livestock leads to deforestation for farmland and negatively affects biodiversity by turning wildlands into soy and maize farms to feed livestock. There's also a connection between employment and positive environmental policies. A change in diet could create industries and jobs that are more sustainable and have a smaller carbon footprint, since the production of plant-based food would create new opportunities and bolster faltering economies that during the pandemic have only been made more fragile. Switching our diets can lead to a significant change, which is absolutely necessary in this time where every possible effort needs to be extended. In order to fight climate change and environmental issues, unity and working together is crucial. And making a nationwide effort, which the US has done before. We've been able to combat issues in a collective effort before. This is necessary by practicing this diet, which would both be kinder to our bodies and our natural world, which should in fact be pursued.
You were absolutely bang on 4 minutes, so well done on time. We'll now have the opening arguments for the against team, essentially arguing that Americans should not go vegan or don't need to. You have 4 minutes starting from now. I can see some of the people are on, so either Savannah, Brett, Cameron, or Sophie, do you want to unmute yourself? Because I think you're still on mute.
Last week in Florida, we had a facility that produces fertilizer for plants that leaked several million tons of nuclear sewage into the environment. And so when we talk about the environmentally friendly of growing plants for food, that's what just happened. We just released toxic nuclear chemicals into the environment. We talk about runoff of these stuff. It's the growing of the crops that really impacts the environment more than the animals. The animals, that's actually the good manure for the soil. We produce these chemicals for the soil to increase plant production. We end up damaging the environment a lot more. We talk about the nitrogen that's added to the soils, nitrogen runoff. That is entirely for plant production. You talked a lot about the economy, and that's very important. There's over 5 billion jobs in the US, or 5 million jobs, sorry, in the US that are in the meat industry. And when you talk about what COVID did, they laid off about 30 million people nationwide. So you just want to lay off 5 million people and say, oh, we'll find jobs to you in another industry. Skills don't always transfer. They're going to take a wage cut. And that's very detrimental to the human, to people say, hey, your wage is going to be cut in half because we're changing industries on you. So you're going to have 5 million people that get affected and uprooted as we go to a more vegan diet. Someone else in my group?
Yep, you still have a couple of minutes.
I guess I'll in. A few of the things I looked at were that if you grow the same crops on a piece of land year after year after year, it destroys the nutrients that are in there. So in order to produce, you'd have to switch up crops year after year to make sure you're not just totally robbing the soil of all its nutrients and everything that's good in it. While doing away with meat entirely, going down from our average of per person of 460 grams a week to 200, we could substantially be more environmentally friendly while still incorporating meat into our diets. Large amounts of water are used for diets like this. For example, a single avocado needing 46 gallons of water a day during the summer. For a single avocado, that's not a whole tree or bush. Another thing is locally sourcing. With certain parts of a vegan diet or vegetarian, we would have to source those fruits, vegetables, what else, from other countries. It might not be in season or whatnot. So yeah, with beef, it's grown here, raised here, all that, and that's what I've got.
You still have 30 seconds if anyone wants to chime in. If not, you can just yield your time. Do a countdown in 5, 4. Oh, here we are. Hey, so.
It's a little loud in here, so I'm really sorry. But with the few seconds that we have left, I did some research, and there are very few ways that vegans can get protein, and you can become protein deficient, but there are options. There just aren't as many as if you weren't vegan.
But that's 4 minutes on the nose. So we're going to go from here to the rebuttal. So in the rebuttal section, the team that is for veganism, you don't need to present any new, you shouldn't present any new material, but you should just pick holes in what the other team has said. No personal attacks, but and you have 3 minutes starting from now.
Okay, so addressing the most recent point about protein, actually there are lots of sources of protein in vegan diets. Like I mentioned before about tree nut farmers not receiving subsidies from the government, nuts are actually a really great source of protein and can be the source for a lot of, like the basis of a lot of foods if we replace meat. And so subsidizing that would actually be a great option for replacing that meat replacing meat. And then about the point about avocados requiring, I don't remember the exact number gallons of water for production. It's still in the long run less water required than if you were to support the meat eating habits in the United States and supporting that agricultural industry. And furthermore, then it's just a healthier substitute. Avocados are also a great source of nutrients and fat to replace meat. On the point of jobs, yes, I agree that there would need to be a restructuring of the job industry when it comes to agriculture, because unfortunately, because subsidies are going towards so many meat and dairy products, a lot of jobs lie within that. I know myself, my grandpa had cattle, my sister-in-law comes from a cattle ranching family. I am from that background. So it really is about just redirecting the industry, because as we change our preferences as a nation and what we're eating and what we're consuming and buying, the job industry would then switch towards that to adapt to whatever our needs are. So obviously I would think that the government would need to contribute in restructuring jobs and making sure that farmers and stuff aren't just losing their entire livelihood and their entire career, but that they can actually adapt to the change. And about, I think it was one of the first points Cameron made about toxic sewage being released. We're already releasing horrible toxins into the environment through factory farming. That needs to be addressed also, but we aren't actually doing anything to offset the damages like methane production from animal agriculture. We're just kind of ignoring the problem, and we're just continuing to invest in a non-existent future, which is just a disservice to Americans. I think that's basically all.
Yeah, you have 10 seconds left.
Okay.
Okay, you have time. Thank you. Okay, the against team, you have 3 minutes to pick holes in the other team's argument. Same again, no personal attacks, and you're starting from now, or make sure you're unmuted.
You brought up the methane that the animals produce. What's interesting to me is methane is really based off their dietary habits. When you compare them to wild animals, they produce less methane than the animals that are penned, and a lot of that comes from how they're farmed. Because the cattle ranches that are out in the mountains, they produce less methane than the ones that are in the pens together. And so coming from a cow background as well, when we do it right and we use the right environments that you really can't grow things off of, there's mountains where you can't grow anything besides cattle on them. They'll eat the grass that naturally grows and the streams that they drink from it. And it's great for them. And we grow great cattle that doesn't produce as much methane as you brought up. Also, the best manure that's for the environment for growing regular crops is animal crop. It is the animal dung. It is that. It's the artificial stuff that we want to use that really, I think, damages the environment way more than having animal stuff, because we're not producing most of the nitrogen-based fertilizers. It's 5 tons of nuclear waste for every 1 ton of finished product that's produced. And that's insane to me.
Anyone else? You have a minute left, either Sophie or Britt.
I guess riding off of what Cameron was just saying, vegan diet wastes available land that could otherwise feed people. Not every crop uses land equally, so I think it's important to take into account that that land is the only thing you could have cattle on. You couldn't grow anything else there. So yeah.
Okay, righty, we've now got the closing arguments. So each team just gets 1 minute to reiterate their major points. The 4 team will go first, starting from now. I think you're still on mute, Danae.
I acknowledge the difficulty of maintaining a vegan diet, and especially with our current habits, it's not really sustainable. And we are consuming at unsustainable rates. That's why drastic change is needed now. To meet the average amount of animal protein and dairy that Americans eat per year, it would take 2 football fields of land per person. If all of the people on the earth were consuming at that rate, we would need 2 planets to feed us. And we only have 1 that's dying. Our resources are being strained, and animal-based agriculture is only deepening that strain. Water is being used at disproportionate rates. It takes way more energy. We're experiencing environmental degradation. Even if we just reduced our consumption, it would make a significant difference. But to be against veganism is actively enabling climate change, but to be for and to practice it is cooperation, kindness, and making a difference in this time where we really need it.
Spot on, 1 minute. Well done. Okay, the against team, make sure you're off mute. You have 1 minute for closing arguments, starting now.
I'll say a little something. I'm sorry again, it's loud in here, but I'm not gonna lie. There's a really good vegan ice cream place just down the road from where I'm at, and I am definitely gonna take a little stop by. But I do understand where you're coming from, and climate change is a big thing happening right now, and we definitely do need to do our part in reducing that. And I think that veganism is just a little step to do our part.
I don't think we're ever going to get the Americans to go vegan fully, because we need animals. They're part of the ecosystem. And as a predator species, when we remove that part of us from the environment, we're basically messing with the food chain that has been built over the whole building of the planet. And that's wrong to completely say, hey, we're not going to be part of the food chain as we have been since day 1.
Okay. Righty. Okay, that is the official part of the debate open. We're now going to open it for questions. If anybody would like to ask a question to either team, please either raise your hands or just unmute yourself and butt in. If nobody does, then I will come up with a couple of stinkers, 1 for each team, and we'll see where we're at. Okay. So does anyone have any questions? I'll count down. 5.
I had a question for Okay, so I had a question for the team that was for veganism. I was just curious where they got their statistics on the methane gases that are produced from the cattle and turkey. I was just curious where that was from.
Let me, hold on. I have like all my sources listed out. Let me double check. For methane?
Yeah.
culinaryschools.org, which was where I got most of the information about the environmental impact.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Does anybody have anything else? Okay, well, the against team, you mentioned that animals are a natural part of the environment at one point. Would you consider cattle and sheep in the US a natural feature of the landscape? Either Cameron, Brett, or Sophie.
I think to a certain extent now, yes, because you know they've been here for a couple hundred years at this point, but obviously they were not native to this land, so it's hard to say fully. But yeah, sorry, I don't know how to answer that really good.
You could, I guess, go at it either way because cows really aren't, but there's some argument to say they're replacing buffalo functionally because
Yeah,
we used to have an awful lot of buffalo, but if you look at what cattle do to streams, yeah, it's pretty crazy. Okay, righty. So that is the formal end of the first debate. What we're going to do now is, I understand there's a limited number of people here, so it's going to be interesting, but I'm going to run a quick poll. And in that poll, there's going to be 2 questions. The first question is, what is your current position on this topic? Either you are for veganism, you don't necessarily have to be practicing, but you're for it, against it. And the second one is, which team do you think won the debate regardless of your position? So I'm going to launch that poll now. And while this happens, I'm going to put turn this off my phone. Righty, there we are. Okay, so, well, that is interesting. So it's almost, so what is my position on the topic? 4 slightly won it by 63% to 38. But which team do we think won was almost 100% in one direction. So even though it was very, very split on people's positions, there was a clear winner on the actual debate itself. So well done, you guys. Righty, second debate. So this one is whether or not grizzly bears should be reintroduced into Utah. This sounds like a fun, academic exercise and a fun little thought exercise, but this is something that has been genuinely proposed a whole series of times. So I do a whole bunch of work with the Wildlife Society and DWR here in Utah, and this gets brought up pretty regularly as to whether or not they should bring back grizzly bears. So I thought it'd be a nice exercise for the class to talk about. So what we're going to do, same format as before. Each team will have 4 minutes for opening arguments. We shall go with the 4 team first. That's Ashlyn, Connor, and Mallory. And then we'll have, after that, we'll have 3 minutes of rebuttals and 1 minute of closing statements. So Ashlyn, Connor, or Mallory, you have 4 minutes on grizzly bears should be reintroduced to Utah, starting from now.
Actually, I have a slideshow. Can I share that really quick?
Yeah, cool. You should be able to share your screen.
Okay.
Fire away.
All right.
Awesome.
So, okay, so grizzly bears should be introduced into Utah. Historically, grizzly bears are native to Utah. Their historic range covered the entire state of Utah, particularly in the Salt Lake area. And their population was reduced over the 19th and 20th centuries because of excessive hunting and trapping. The last grizzly bear was actually killed in 1923. His name was Old Ephraim, was killed by a hunter. And the population was reduced actually nationwide. And there was actually a really big concern for grizzly population, so they were put on the threatened species list. And they started recovery programs. And while they have recovered to an extent and have been taken off the threatened species list, there's continuing need for recovery because there are concerns about renewed hunting efforts and lack of genetic diversity among current populations. And by reintroducing grizzly bears in Utah, we can help grow the population and provide another gene pool that's isolated. And some of the ecological and cultural benefits that come with reintroducing grizzly bears. Grizzly bears in general play an important ecological role as omnivores. They eat both seeds and animals, or of plants and animals, and by eating some berries and other plants, they help spread seeds and provide fertilizer for those plants. And by eating prey like elk and deer, they take part in this phenomenon of trophic cascade, which is essentially the idea that these large prey animals, these large predators eating prey such as elk and deer, help regulate those prey populations, which benefits the vegetation and other organisms that those animals interact with. An example of the trophic cascade was seen in Yellowstone with the reintroduction of wolves, which are another big predator like grizzly bears. And the effects seen in Yellowstone were that, populations of willows, cottonwoods, aspens all increased. And along with that, the strength of riverbeds also increased because prey were staying away from rivers because they were afraid of being attacked by predators. And that helped reduce erosion. In addition to these ecological benefits, the reintroduction of grizzly bears could also have a significant cultural effect because within several Native American tribes within Utah, grizzly bears have played an important role. Historically, Native Americans have used grizzly bears for their fur, their meat, and also their claws for decoration. They've also been seen as a symbol of strength and healing. And by helping preserve grizzly bear populations, we preserve a part of this culture. And one thing that people bring up a lot when talking about reintroducing grizzly bears is safety concerns, which are really kind of unfounded because grizzly bears are naturally shy and reclusive. And in Yellowstone, which gets millions of visitors every year, your chances of being attacked are 1 in 2.7 million, according to the National Park Service. You're more likely to get trampled, to die being chopped by a cow than from a grizzly bear attack. Cows kill about 20 people each year. Bears only kill about 1 or 2. And since Yellowstone's founding in 1872, there have been 8 deaths from grizzly bears, most of which involved some sort of disregarding of bear safety rules, such as, poking cubs or leaving food unattended at a camp. And all those can be avoided by basic bear education. And also, if there are concerns for not just people, but animals, like livestock, in ranches far out in the mountains, there are basic precautions that can be taken, like installing electrical fences and bear-proof feed traps that can keep bears away and help protect both humans and animals.
Okay, spot on. You were at exactly 4 minutes there, pretty much. So do you want to start? Yeah, there you are, answering the screen. Righty. So that is the arguments for in reintroducing grizzly bears. We'll have the opening arguments to not reintroduce grizzly bears to Utah. You got 4 minutes starting from now. Make sure you're off mute.
All right, so we're doing why we should not reintroduce grizzly bears into Utah. Sadie?
Okay, so some of the arguments that Katie, who was also our group member, she had to work today, but she gave us some pointers on some direction that she found, and these were hers. So it costs a lot of money to place them throughout the state, as well as their upkeep to care for them once they are reintroduced to the state, as well as for an increased opportunity for human bear interaction, which kind of defeats the purpose of reintroducing them to an area. And then also a loss of livestock, which is talked about in the next slide. There's an example of that in Idaho that's specifically gone pretty bad, that hasn't been beneficial to the area as a whole. So if we can move to that one. So like it says on the slide, in Idaho, there are cases where individuals have lost up to $11,000 worth. Sorry, move my screen. $11,000 worth of livestock from bear predation, which is not only bad for the individual, but also for the bear. There's been an accumulation of $800,000 worth of livestock lost in the Yellowstone area, proving how hard and expensive it is and will be to manage the bears. Situations have become worse when a human will kill a bear due to their intrusion on their livestock, opposing the initial goal of reintroducing the bears. And most bears thrive on an 80% vegetation diet, whereas eating livestock can be detrimental to their health. So I'm actually from Idaho, Eastern Idaho, by West Yellowstone, and so this has been a hot topic that has been discussed in my area with grizzly bears and wolves. I have more of an experience with learning about the wolves, but when this is reintroduced, it can be really harmful to ranchers who are trying to have their livestock openly graze on BLM ground as well as around Yellowstone. And so this can really cause some negative barriers for family operations who are trying to ranch and make a living in that regard.
So not only do we have a threat to our livestock and the economic livelihood of some ranchers, we also have increased opportunities for bear-human interaction. So last year, 2020, in Yellowstone, they actually saw an increase in the number of grizzly bear attacks. Now, there were more people in the park because we just couldn't be anywhere. But if that's a new trend for post-pandemic behaviors, could that signal a problem? Then can we expect all of the tourists, especially people not from grizzly areas like myself, to be safe, to follow bear protocols? And additionally, Utah's population is expected to double by 2070, which means we'll need more land, we'll need more food, and we'll need more space to grow. And that would ultimately encroach on grizzly bear habitat, which would of course increase opportunities for interaction, as well as ultimately be bad for the grizzly bears because they have less space to roam and hunt and grow.
So the cost and placement, this was our third point in the upkeep of once the bears are relocated in Utah. So Yellowstone pays $2.5 to $5 million annually for state and federal management of bears in Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. So this is expensive due to the monitoring of the bears and their habitat, and also making sure that there's no dangerous human contact. Within West Yellowstone, there has been different I'm trying to think of the word, not organizations, but things that have been implemented to help with the care of the upkeep, but that is a national park. And so when they're just relocated into the general area of a state, this can be hard to keep funding and get counties behind it on why that would be beneficial to their area.
Okay, you just a wincy bit over time, so I'm going to put you on there. No, you're all good. So I'll put you on next time. Okay, so we now have 3 minutes for rebuttals. We'll start with the team that is for reintroducing grizzly bears. You have 3 minutes to pick holes in the other team's argument, starting from, make sure you're off mute and starting from now.
All right, so I think the first point you guys mentioned was the cost. And a lot of that cost is just the creation of jobs that comes with the management of bears. You know, there's needs to be rangers, there needs to be people on call in case, bears do break into fences. And so, yeah, a lot of that is creation of jobs. And also, along with cost, mostly it's a question of how much you value biodiversity. So that's more of an ethical question more than, should we introduce grizzly bears? But, some of the benefits that reintroduced grizzly bears have can actually have financial benefits as well, such as the, reduced erosion on riverbeds that can actually help to reduce property damages to both federal and private properties when there's stuff like flash floods. And as for loss of livestock, again, there's precautions that we can take in, such as, electric fences and just basically careful watching of the livestock. And then as for safety in national parks, national parks aren't for humans. That's right. Their primary goal is the protection of nature. And really most of the problems and attacks and the deaths that happen because of human bear interaction in national parks is due to lack of education. People don't know what to do when they see a bear. And really, solution to that is just to put out pamphlets, put out signs, just to make sure people know what they're getting to when they go into bear country.
We'll now go on to the rebuttals for the against reintroducing grizzly bear team. You have up to 3 minutes. Make sure you're off mute and starting from now.
Okay, I'll add in a little bit about just the cattle portion of that. I feel like I'm most comfortable in that area, just because I'm from Idaho and that's what I'm used to being around. So when cattle are out on the range, like up in the mountains, they're not fenced in, and that's kind of the point, is they're able to open range and graze all that land and foliage down, and so that can be tough to monitor that when the bears are reintroduced there. Of course, we can always take precautions and have them be tracked, with their a tracking device or whatnot. But when that comes to when they start and get a taste of that, nice meat, then it's really just downhill from there on being able to control that. And we've seen that primarily with wolves and the deer and elk population, of seeing those populations decline significantly once wolves were reintroduced. And so I feel like that would happen in the same regard when it comes to cattle, as well as then carry over into the elk and deer populations.
And I can add a little bit about the interaction between like humans and bears, because while I don't come from a place where grizzlies exist, we do have black bears, which are smaller, slightly more adorable. And they, at least at one of our scout camps, we had them really bad because scouts would like leave stuff in their tents, because where else can we store them if we don't have the facilities to store them? And the bears would come in, they'd eat a little bit, and then they'd come back, and eventually that becomes a problem because they're starting to think that humans can provide food. And when humans don't provide food, it becomes, they get a little violent. Like, if someone takes my food, I'm going to get a little angry with them. So it's completely understandable. That's kind of, we want to avoid that happening.
Okay, anything else? Would you yield your time? Okay, we'll go on from there. Okay, so finally, we now have the closing arguments. Each team has 1 minute for closing arguments. We'll start again with the 4 team. This is just an opportunity to reiterate your... Oh, we'll now go on to the closing arguments. Each team here has the opportunity just to reiterate their major points. You get 1 minute per team. We'll start with the 4 team. You have 1 minute to close up, starting from now. And make sure you're off mute.
Yeah. So grizzly bears have historically been native to Utah. I mean, our hockey team is the grizzly bears. It's kind of like the California family and the grizzly bears. The reason they're no longer native to Utah is because of human activity, excessive hunting and trapping. And we have a responsibility to reintroduce these populations and to maintain them, because doing so will have not only ecological benefits that will help increase plant production, but also cultural benefits. And as for the safety concerns and costs, again, it's our responsibility because we caused them to go out of Utah in the first place. And by reintroducing them, we can fix past mistakes.
Okay, sweet. Team against reintroducing grizzly bears, you have 1 minute. So team not against reintroducing grizzly bears, you've got 1 minute for closing arguments, starting from now.
Okay, so I guess my closing argument after talking about this for a little bit is to always consider all the variables going into something like this. And so we've been living and thriving in regards to Utah, how it is now. And so when you reintroduce something to an environment that is already functioning at, I would say, a pretty successful rate, then you have many opportunities for things to go wrong. And just like I said before, I've seen it happen when we reintroduce wolves into Eastern Idaho. It definitely plays a role in the environment and the way things operate. And again, messing with nature, you can't play God in these type of situations that well and have it cater to your benefit.
Okay, right, you will now go on to questions. Does anybody have a question? And if you do, please just speak up and then tell me which team you're directing the question actually to. Okay, in that case, I will start. A team that is against reintroductions of grizzly bears You brought up the situation with wolves in eastern Idaho and also in the place living with bears. What about in places like, you know, far-flung parts of the world where they've coexisted with grizzly bears quite happily for a long time, such as, well, Canada for one, or Alaska. So there they both have not nearly as many people, but they're coexisting with grizzly bears really rather happily. And so what are they doing that we would then be unable to do?
I think like kind of like what I said in our closing argument, I think when you try to maneuver your way into an environment that is already existing, how do you manage the amount of wolves that you reintroduce, and then for them to, when they start populating with themselves, it's hard to regulate that. Whereas when they're already pre-existing, like for example, like you said in Canada, that's an environment that functions well on its own without human interaction. And I sometimes think we as humans have our way of ruining things when it comes to environments.
Okay. And so anybody else got any questions? Well, I'll fire one up. Okay, so this is to the for reintroducing team. You mentioned that Utah was, well, is part of grizzly bears' ancestral range, as is places like California and Arizona and even Mexico. They went all the way down there at one point. But is Utah the same Utah that it was when the last grizzly bear died, or has the state changed significantly?
I mean, yeah, humans have caused a lot of changes to the environment. Well, you know, one of the changes is, you know, the loss of grizzly bears, and they've had a lot of other changes, but there's still parts of the state, you know, that are protected by, you know, state and federal parks that have remained unchanged, so that where grizzly bears can thrive.
Okay, great. Righty, we'll go on to the last part now. That is the poll. This could be a bit one-sided because there's 3 people on one team and only one on the other, but we'll have a go. So same poll as before. First question is, what is your position on this issue? Should they be introduced? And second is, which team do you think won the debate regardless of your position? And it should go up now. Okay. Well, that is interesting. So we've got 67% of people are for reintroducing grizzly bears to Utah, which is kind of cool. And on the which team do I think won? It's exactly split, 50-50, right down the middle. So well done, you guys. That's awesome. Okay, so just before we finish, big round of applause for everybody. Well done. You guys are well prepared. That was awesome. I'm going to stop the recording right now.